Hello and welcome to another edition of Devlin's Pirate Radio Show. We're back and got a whole bunch of topics for you. Before we get to that, I just wanted to give you a little update on my life. I am no longer unemployed. I have a job at Value Village. I was hired there and have just begun. Now, I'm not going to talk about it too much because, one, I'm not the kind of person to talk about, work-related things while I'm working there. I might talk little things, but I'm not going to, praise or put down anything. They are just have brought me in and seem to be very accepting of me so far. And I just wanted to update you to say that I am back at work. And I decided that would be a good jump start for my first topic, which I have wanted to talk about this for some time, but wasn't sure if I ever was. But I decided that there's been a lot of time put behind it now, and I feel it needs to be talked about. It's basically, I'm going to talk about the reasons why I went into such a dark place, because I think a lot of people have different thoughts on why I went to the dark place. Earlier this year, of course, I'm talking about. And I wanted to try to put it into words. Not only for me, for therapy, I've often said this podcast is therapy for me, but because I realize now that although this is something that kind of feels like I'm all by myself, I get the feeling this is something other people feel too. I think there's a lot of us like me, but maybe I'm just more dramatic in dealing with it. I've had a lot of people tell me that one of my their favorite episodes of mine is when I talked openly about suicide. And they liked that I talked about it, even though they said it was hard hearing me talk about it. But they had been there, and they thought it was very important that I'm not afraid to talk about stuff like that. So I, for the while, was even thinking of not even going there. But I decided, now that, I'm sort of in a better place now. I say sorta because I have my bad days, but they're very few and far between. So I think I'm healing. I've got a new job to help me keep my mind off things. The podcast's going really well. So I'm going to try to let you guys know what I was going through a bit, and maybe some of you can relate to this feeling. I don't like talking about it only because of the fact that I feel it's a first world problem, and I feel that there's people probably with bigger problems out there, but then I realize that, any problem is big if it takes you to a place that makes you think of ending your life. I have abandonment issues. I'm not exactly sure where they come from, but I have issues when I feel that I've been left behind. I recently met somebody and we joked, and I just kind of made a thing like, I don't want to be left behind. And they just kind of made a joke saying, no, Devlin will never be left behind. And I remember laughing at the thing, and it was fun, and we had a good time talking about it. But it really reminded me of how far I've come in the last couple of months, where I'm in a better place now. When Target ended, the year started off pretty good. I was kind of happy where things were in my life. And then when Target came to an end, it wasn't just the loss of my job. Because I think people were coddling me to the point where they were like, wow, he lost his job and he's lost his mind. But there was so much more to it. And I'm not going to go into deep things, but I will touch upon some stuff that I think need to be touched upon. When Target left Canada, we almost immediately were abandoned by our higher-ups. Target as a company, just really didn't do anything for us anymore. They would answer very briefly questions, and within a day, our head staff, not all of them, but the majority, had abandoned us. So I had gone through 2 years of basically people telling me, we're a team, we stick together, we're a family. And then all of a sudden your superiors that, I'm old-fashioned, I still looked up to them. I might not have agreed with all of them, but I still had a sense of these are my bosses and they look after you. And all the heads abandoned us. They'd hide up in their offices, they'd play games, they'd search for work already while we were on the floor dealing with unruly people who were looking for discounts. If it wasn't for a group of middle management that stepped up to the plate, I think that place would have looked like Mad Max. That world where everybody was just going crazy and customers would be running rampant and everybody would be jumping ship. Now, we did have a lot of people jump ship, but the fact that we had so many people stay, I think, had a lot to do with the fact that middle management really stepped up to the plate when we were abandoned by the higher-ups. And I was saddened because some of the higher-ups I had in high regards that things. So I had never been in a situation like this. I had been in closing companies before, but not just being dumped totally from one minute we're trying to. But middle management came in and did their best, but it was still hard and difficult. Right after the announcement, people were starting to leave. Some people said, well, I'll stay right to the end, but other people felt they had to go right away. One, because they couldn't see liquidation happening. Others, just because they wanted to make sure they were secure because they had bills to pay. And I don't begrudge anybody who had to leave early. And with that same breath, I thank all the people that stayed. And if there's ever a war, you are the people I want on my side. Because you guys stuck through some really hard times, and you were the fighters I would want. One of the first people that left was a hard one for me. And I know why he had to do it, and I respect why he had to do it, but it was not any easier on me, and I've had him on the show. He's Damien Troutman. I hope he doesn't mind that I'm talking about this, but he had to go, and he told me before he made any official decisions because he knew I wouldn't take it very well. Damien and I not only were good co-workers, but over the 2 years, we had become really great friends. He went through a lot, and I helped him through it. And in return, a lot of ways he helped me through some things. I really came to care for him. I love him. Still do. Always will. He had to go, and he told me it, and that was hard because now I was losing one of my closest comrades. He, I had a lot of good friends, but he was probably one of the closest. And he stuck with me when he saw me through my best and my worst. And he, when he told me he had to leave, I was really sad because it also put into perspective that I was going to start losing other people. I remember I had a lot of tears. He, told me he really didn't want to leave and he hated leaving me and not seeing me as often. He vowed he would stay by my side, and I said, you're going to have to prove it. Because you got to remember, I'm an old man that, when I was younger, people would always say, I got a great opportunity, I'm going. And then you'd say, oh yeah, we'll stay in touch, we got phones and stuff. And then you'd hear from them once in a blue moon. And I had a hard time dealing with that. And So I just told Damien, you're going to have to prove it. And he has. He stepped up to the plate. But it was hard. And I still remember the day he left. I decided I was tired of crying about it, and I was going to stay strong for the both of us. I still remember him walking around the corner, and I just broke down. I just broke down, and he came over and gave me one of the longest hugs, and we just kind of melted into one another, because we knew this was not easy. As I said, he has proven it, and I'm going to force him to keep proving it, because I think we need each other. Then other people started leaving, maybe ones that weren't as close to me, but still I was going to be saddened to not see their faces anymore, or know about their life except through Facebook. Then we were getting closer to the end, and some of my closest friends I promised to stay close to, which I have. Gabriella and Deborah, and I promised I'd talk to Faye. Heather abandoned me, but didn't. She doesn't like to deal with things. You know I'm right, Mrs. Curto, if you're listening to this. And what I hated was she actually kind of pushed me away. I'm not mad at you for this, because I know that's how you dealt with things, but it did hurt a little, because I know you didn't want to deal with it, and I know you wanted to, you couldn't deal with us hanging out together because it would make you cry. But it was bothered me a little because of the fact that we lost a lot of times to have some laughs, too, even though you couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with it either, but I was ready to try. I still talk to you regularly, so that helps, but I did feel a little abandoned. Then on the final day, I'm saying goodbye to people and trying to estimate, will I ever see them again? Will they just be a status on Facebook? Will they just be a bump into them at the store and I'm trying to remember their name? Or they're going to be someone I actually talk to on a regular basis? I have always had this abandonment issue for a long time, and it continued. And that's what put me into the dark side, because when I was younger, people would always tell me, oh, we will talk, we will stay together. But as you grow older, you start realizing that it doesn't happen. And so when people tell you these words, they're just words. And I have a hard time with that, because I tend to keep reaching out, and then I realize that they're just not reaching out back anymore, and I realize, okay, this has now gone from this intense friendship to now an acquaintance, and I hate that, because I don't see how when you love somebody, they disappear all of a sudden out of your life, and it's breaking my heart, and I'd like to think it breaks their heart, but it just seems like so easy for them to just move on. Because it's like, if they really missed me, why don't they pick up the phone or write me an email or just, hey, you want to meet for coffee? Now, during liquidation, I actually became closer with people that I wasn't close to before, and that was quite nice, too. But it's just a sad thing. I never understood how families are always all about family. Family is the most important thing. Family is, and then I see, their kids leaving for job opportunities. I understand, great job opportunity, you gotta go. But when I see a family who's always talking about how close they are, and then I see that all their family members have moved so far away from them, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a cynic. To me, that says, how much do they really mean to you? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't take those job opportunities or go for your goals. Absolutely not. I am just saying, if you're not staying in touch with these people on a regular basis, I just can't believe the whole, this is supposed to be this way, kind of like, we're still so strong. I know I have some wonderful friendships that I don't hear from people, maybe once a year, once every couple of months, and when we get talking, it's just like old times again. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't want to see them more. Then I've got friends that, well, that's just enough time to deal with them, and they probably think the same way with me, and I can't begrudge that. So I went into the dark place because I had this world that was so supportive and were family, and now these people were going to be slowly go from family to possibly staying as friends. I'm lucky to say most of them I still consider really close friends, but I was starting to lose some as acquaintances. And I still fear it's going to continue now that I'm working. I'm going to have hours. They're going to be working soon. Yes, it's the way life is, and we all need to change. But I am allowed to say it sucks every once in a while. And I am old enough to know that when somebody tells me, oh, we are always going to stay friends, we're going to stay close, I'm sorry, I have seen people who I have been intimate with, and then 2 years later, I feel like I don't mean anything to them. And that's the part I couldn't get, and I went into the dark place and wanted to die. But luckily you look around and see that there's some consistency. You see friends like Mike and Corda and Dave and other people that are in my life that want to be there. But sometimes it's just not enough. You just don't get. You start thinking, I must be an awful person. They keep telling me they love me, and then they just throw me aside. And I went into a deeper hole than I've been in a long time. I haven't been there for so long, and I didn't know how to crawl back out of it. It took me ages, and I'm still not at the top, but I'm climbing, getting there. I am very close to getting to the top. I know I won't totally ever feel safe. I'll always feel this way. It's not death either. When people die on me, I don't feel left behind because I understand that's a part of life, and I understand change too. I don't understand why things have to change so much. The reason I felt I needed to talk about this is because I also saw other people that might feel this way, and I wanted to give them a sign of hope, even though I'm, broke down here. Crying is a good thing. Keeping yourself busy is a good thing. I have made jokes that I'm just not going to connect with people like I once did. But because I was really close with, people at Target, I'm not going to do that again. And so far, I'm holding my ground at Value Village. I'm not going in to make friends. This is just a job to me. I tell people I'm going to cut myself off and not get close to people anymore. And Mike looks at me and says, that's not the kind of person you are. And I agree with him. But I really wish I could. Because sometimes I feel that it's easier for the world to be able to turn things off. Then I meet some really sensitive people that I know are feeling the same way, and that's why I have to do segments like this. They might be hard to listen to. Hey, you might even skip over and go to one of my later ones, and I'm okay with that. But for the ones who are dealing with this kind of stuff, you just gotta hang on. Look for those people that do want you in their lives and hold on to them for dear life. Keep yourself busy. Find activities you like that make you smile. And don't be afraid to break down and cry every once in a while. As long as you find a good laugh right after. Go listen to some sad songs, cry your eyes out. But then go watch a comedy show or something that makes you smile. So, that's my segment on being left behind. And hopefully it helps you people that have been going through it as well. And for those of you who don't know what the heck I'm talking about, you're lucky. You're lucky, and I'm also sad for you because I think I've always said I hate being sensitive, but I wouldn't change it for anything in the world because of the fact that I feel I'm living life to the fullest. I don't think living life to the fullest is always about traveling and bungee jumping and going. I think life to the fullest is to feel all the ranges of emotions. And I do. And that's probably why I connect with people who do as well. And I'm a little saddened for people that don't. Anyhow, that's enough. I'm going to walk down memory lane in the next segment, and so I'm going to take a break, blow my nose, and I'll be back. Welcome back, and I am here, and I'm getting ready to take a stroll down memory lane, which I like to do now and again. And I want to talk to you about a very big year in my life, 1985. Now, some of you regular listeners know that I've always talked about years that end in 5 are game changers. They always change my life up in some way. I know some of you think that years that end in 5 for me are always bad. No, that's not true. They can be bad, but they can also be good in a way that they change my life. There's usually upheaval and stuff. Sure, this year that ended in 5, 2015, yeah, it was bad. 1985 wasn't. In fact, I met some incredible people in 1985. Friends of mine. A friend named Dave Marshall, a friend named Mike Obermeyer, and a friend named Richard Costanza. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 1985, but I want to talk right now about my friendship with Richard, because it really did define me in a lot of ways. I've kind of cleared that I'm going to talk about this stuff, but I won't get too personal or anything. Well, a little. This memory lane will actually probably be a 2-parter. I'm going to split it up because just so much happened, and I'm not even going to cover everything in 85. Just 2 kind of related incidences. But today I want to talk mostly about Richard, and the reason why is because Richard came in a time in my life when I was very confused and messed up. Not just about, my being gay, but just I didn't know where life was going. I was 17 years old, and I wasn't a great student. I had my bouts with depression. I had all my anxieties and stuff like that, as every teen does. And, of course, when you're a teen, everything's the end of the world, because your hormones are all raging. Just everything's so intense that everything is dramatic and over the top. And anybody who's been a teenager or who has teenagers know what I'm talking about. I was no different. And in 85, I took drama class for the first time, and I met this larger-than-life student, Richard. He was a year or 2 younger than me. And I remember one of my first assignments in drama class was you were supposed to get together with someone and just interview them, just talk, ask them questions and stuff. And I was lucky enough to get Richard. I say that because of the fact that I think Richard was somebody I really needed in my life at that time. As I said, I had other friends and I was meeting new ones, but Richard was very different. Richard was this tall, handsome boy that he just walked to the beat of his own drummer. He just did whatever he wanted and didn't care what anybody thought. He'd listen to opera music. He'd listen to pop music too, but, he loved opera. He loved topics that teens weren't talking about at the time. Some teachers really liked Richard, and a lot of students, although he did have a lot of supporters and friends, most of the kids did not like him. And Richard didn't care that they didn't like him, which was a total shock for me because I kind of desperately wanted to be liked by everyone. But Richard kind of showed me that that's not capable, and who cares if it isn't. As I said, I got to interview him and we got closer. We eventually became part of a band. And there's no way I can fit talking about Richard and talking about the band. So the band part of it will be next week, 1985 Part 2. Because I do want to talk about that because it was a very special time. And a lot of people are probably in shock right now that I was in a band. And, yeah, Richard and I were in this band, and we also just did so many things together. He taught me how to play chess. He taught me, lots of different things. We'd hang out at his home, and he would, he'd just teach me about a lot of things, about history and geography and Italian. He was an Italian. He is an Italian. He's not, I gave up my being Italian. And he, showed me so much thing. He'd play opera for me, and we'd watch Carry On movies in the afternoon and stuff. So, I was absolutely infatuated with him, because I hung out with him I felt like I was probably a little puppy dog following him around, but I know we were equals as friends when I look back now. But, my problem, and probably still today, is I fall for people that I really get to know. If I get to know them, I kind of fall in love with them for a bit. Now, this is pre-relationship time, so I, to this day, can honestly say that I believe I was totally in love with Richard. He wasn't the first person I thought I was in love with, but I had a thing about being in these unrequited love affairs where I just love these straight guys that were like my best friends, but, that's all they could offer me. And it hurt sometimes because I'd watch them with girlfriends. Richard had a girlfriend, and it would just hurt me because I'd go home listening to all these sad songs and wishing, I could be a girl so I could be with them. Richard and I's friendship was really close to the point where even our parents were making jokes about us being, boyfriends and stuff. And I always was bothered for that, for Richard's sake, because Richard was straight. I was gay, but I didn't like anybody. I knew I was gay, but I didn't like people calling it out because I hadn't officially come out. Richard was the first person I ever told that I think I was bisexual. Now, I knew I was gay, but I decided bisexual would be easier to say, because I was also very confused, because I also believed that one day I'd meet a woman and still have kids and stuff. And I remember Richard in his very, taking me under his wing kind of way, he was supportive of it. In fact, he told me that he's read that, most teenage boys go through a bisexual phase. And they have these intense relationships with other guys as well as girls. And that made me feel good. That made me feel good because I felt he understood me. He didn't push me away because of it. And, it was an eye-opener to say, hey, look, I'm going to meet people that are going to be okay with me coming out, and it was one step closer to getting there. Richard also got me to do many, many crazy things. He was very rebellious, and he took me out to train tracks, I remember, and we'd stand a lot closer than we should have been when trains went by. Now, you got to remember, I was brought up in a very sheltered. My mother was very protective of me and didn't like me doing any of that stuff. Even when she gave me bouts of freedom, like she let me, okay, I'm going to let you go with your friends downtown, she would always be listening to her radio scanner and saying, oh, but if you do go downtown, stay away from James Street because I just heard the police are there. There's a guy running around with a knife. So she would always instill fear in me to the point where I'm like, do I really want to go with my friends downtown? So I was very protective. My mother was very like that. I don't think she was doing it to be mean. I think that was just my mother. She was like, okay, if I'm going to have to let the bird out of the nest, he's going to have to know that there's evil things out there. And that made me to the point where I didn't do it. So Richard, at the time forced me to do a lot of things that were out of my comfort level. And, I remember hanging out at the train track. My mother would have just been having a heart attack if she knew. I don't think she ever found out. I know it seems innocent, but my mother would have just been worried that I would have tripped or something. And I was scared. Richard knew I was scared. But he always could talk me into it. I can only recall one thing he could never talk me into, and which shocks me, because I think I would have walked through fire for this boy. And that is, he wanted to always be blood brothers. It was the 80s. It was a big thing, you'd see old movies where they'd do blood brothers and stuff. And, it was the 80s. It was also the time of AIDS, and I got very frightened, and I couldn't do it. It was the one of the few times I said no, and he pushed it a little bit, but he didn't try to force me. He just said, oh, how awesome it would be to, do this. I wouldn't have done it with anyone else. And when I think back, I'm surprised I did not do it, because to me that would have been an ultimate commitment. And I was just so afraid. But I also was going through a lot too, because I had come to terms with the fact that I had fallen in love with Richard, and that I just thought if we were blood brothers and then something happened, he, left and married or something, I would have been even more devastated than I would be. So to me, it was a commitment that could never really follow through. But I don't know, going back now with the information I know, I probably would have done it. Another time that he forced me to do something, and some of the stuff he made me do was crazy. I remember going to Toronto one time, and he didn't want to pay parking, so he actually had me lift up the holder, the bar that you have to pay, and then the bar goes up, and I remember doing that a few times with him, and to me, that's breaking the law. So the fact that I did that, and nobody would have been able to get me to do that except him. He had just an incredible hold on me. It was a scary hold. It was exciting and scary. That's why I think this was different than any of the other people that I thought I had fallen in love with, and I knew this one was more intense, because I just knew, I would do anything. And the time it came to play, I always put this as 1985, but honestly it could have been crossed over into 86, 87, but I know it all started around 85. But anyhow, we were taking a hike. He'd like to hike a little bit, and we were on the escarpment, and we got to a place. We were there with a young guy named Mike Carista, a really nice guy too, a friend, and we saw there was this one side of the escarpment, and it was very steep. I was still an overweight kid, and Richard decided that he wanted to climb up the escarpment, and he wanted me to go with him. And I looked at how steep this was, and I'm telling you, this wasn't mountain climbing. This is rock climbing. It was that steep. And you're talking a kid that didn't have a lot of physical abilities and stuff, and I said, no, I can't do that. That's crazy. And he kept talking to me, and he even found an old piece of rope and even said that he would tie himself to me. And if I fell, he fell. And I'm like, that's the craziest thing I have ever heard, because now we're both going to get seriously hurt or die if we both fall. I'm not necessarily proud of this, but he eventually talked me into it. And we tied each other together, and he climbed up first, I climbed up second, and there are moments of my youth I can barely remember, and I can still remember my fingernails clawing into the side of the mountain. Because we're talking, we didn't have, like, harnesses, anything. And we climbed up the side of the escarpment, and I remember just thinking, if he slips, or I slip, that's it. It could be game over. If not, lots of broken bones. We actually made it to the top, and I felt really good about myself. To an extent. I also felt like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Richard was proud of me, and he gave me a hug. Richard also was one of the first people to teach me about hug. He introduced me to a wonderful motivational speaker, Leo Buscaglia. And he taught about hugging, and because my family didn't hug, but he would hug me. And I remember me hugging me, and I felt so good. And this was kind of like blood brothers to me, because I followed him blindly up this mountain. To which it followed with, let's do it again. Well, my senses kicked in, and I said, no, I couldn't do it. And Richard kept bugging me to do it. Finally, I just said, no, I'm not doing it. And then Mike Carista stuck in and said, look, stop harassing him. He doesn't want to do it again. Richard kind of got a little bit upset and bent out of shape that Mike had, come in, and the fact that I was denying him again. And I just left and walked home. Things started falling apart for us. We'd still chat, but I've since found out there was more going on than I know. Richard was going through a lot of personal stuff. I knew turning him down was the right thing to do. I shouldn't have even climbed the mountain the first time. But I'm glad I did. What can I say? We eventually split apart, and he went to Italy to do some opera singing training. He's a lovely opera singer. And I didn't think I'd see him again. And then some wonderful things transpired. A couple of years later, I saw pictures of him that said he was going to be playing at a church. And I was interested to see. I never heard him sing before. I knew he loved opera, but I didn't even know he had it. He mentioned he had it, but I never heard him sing. I did go to he did sing in the chorus of Opera Hamilton once, and I went to one of the rehearsals for that. But it's hard to hear somebody when they're singing in the chorus. Anyhow, I changed all my plans to make sure I was going to be at that church to hear him. And I went, not knowing how it was going to be. It could have gone either way. Was he still mad at me? Did he still care about me? Did he remember me? This is the stuff that goes through your head. I was in my 20s now, but I'm a guy who likes closure. So I hated the fact that we just kind of faded away. We didn't just have a final goodbye. We didn't have anything. And after this intense relationship, I needed closure. Whether he hated me, loved me, that's it. So I went to the church, and there was, quite a few people there, but there was this whole back section that wasn't. And I noticed that everybody was in one certain area. So I decided I'd deliberately sit in a spot where he couldn't miss me. I remember they started the concert. He walked out on stage, and he was, smiling to the crowd. And then he looked and saw me sitting there. And I remember he gave me the sweetest smile and a nod. And then he began singing and blew me away at how wonderful he was. After I went to go meet him, and again I waited for all his admirers to go see him, and I was still nervous. Because sure, he gave me a nod, he was happy to see me, but it could just be like, when you meet a friend. Oh, it was great seeing you, and that's it. I remember listening to him while these admirers were talking, and Richard was very, he was going by Ricardo, and he was very animated and very passionate about him talking, and he was so mature and grown up, and I thought, wow, I haven't even grown up that much, and listen to him. As the people started leaving, I finally got my chance with Richard, and being the last one there, within seconds, Richard became the guy I knew. Gave me a big hug, and was so happy that I came out to see him. It was so amazing. In just seconds, he showed that, no, I'm still really the Richard. I just have another persona when I'm, the opera singer. We only got to hang out a little bit, but in the years following, he would come back. He lived in Italy with his family, and he'd come back to visit his mother and sister and father, and he'd come back and forth, and every once in a while we got to spend a couple of hours together, and it's been wonderful. Recently, I just heard from Richard again. He sent me an email, and he told me that he had begun listening to my podcasts, and he loved hearing my voice on a regular basis. And one, I felt wonderful of the power of the podcast, but we started emailing and talking a lot about things we never talked about then. I even went as far as saying that, let's be honest, we both know, looking back, that I was absolutely in love with you. And he sent me the most wonderful response, and how he said that he had never connected to anyone except for me, which was nice to hear. And he was always about how we always have this connection, even though we can't always be together, and that there'll be this connection. And it made me feel wonderful. We've emailed back and forth regularly, and I look forward to, when I hear from him. I won't go into personal things that we talked about, but we have since talked a lot about some of the missing pieces that happened, and I hope to talk further about them. But he was such an important part of my life. He wasn't just one of the many unrequited lives I've had in my past. He definitely showed me that it's okay to be different, that it was okay to do my own thing and not care so much about what people think. I still do, but then I have my moments that I think, no, I shouldn't worry about that. Anyhow, I hope he listens to this one. I've told him I'm going to talk about it, and I hope his heart's beating really fast right now. As I said, next week I'm going to talk about the music side, and about another guy, Mike Obermeyer, that was in there, and MacLeod. And you'll get to hear about my rocker side, 1985 Part 2, next week. And I am going to take a break because I need one, and I'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back. We're here with you on Devlin's Pirate Radio Show, and we are continuing with this episode. And I hope your summer's going well. Mine's going pretty good. I haven't really done as much as I normally do, but it's been busy, and I've done some fun things. Hopefully August will be even more fun. One thing I love about summer is anybody who knows me knows that I like to have music with me all the time. I usually always have my MP3. I usually have a speaker just in case I need to, share music with everybody. And I have music with me all the time, no matter where I am. It's very seldom you'll find me without. And summertime is great for listening to music, whether you're going for a walk or just sitting, relaxing somewhere. Or sometimes I go over to a friend's pool and I'll put music on. It's just so nice. And one of my favorite groups, like many other people to play during the summer, is the Beach Boys. Now, I don't think I've talked about music a little bit on this show, but I don't think I've actually just spent time talking about a particular group and artist, but this will be my first then, because I absolutely adore the Beach Boys. The 1960s California sound that they started around, I think, just prior to the Beatles and all that. And of course they gave us all that great surf music at the beginning and then refined it to just really great stuff. Just classic tunes all around. And now, I think they're known as the California Sound, and they were grouped in with people as like the Mamas and Papas, I think the Loving Spoonful, Jan and Dean, like stuff like that. And I love all that stuff. But I think there's a reason why the Beach Boys are, far and above all of those groups. And I just think that they're timeless. I think their music just feels so great on a sunny day. I listen to a lot of Beach Boys over the summer. I actually listen to it all year round. I think their musical style is just so incredible. All the harmonies and, they started with a lot of fun stuff like Fun, Fun, Fun and I Get Around and Surfin' USA. And, they continued that with, like stuff like California Girls and Help Me Rhonda and, so many good ones to mention. And then they got kind of more artistic. Brian Wilson and his brothers, they just got into really trying a lot of musical things. And, see, this is why I hate when people start suggesting that the Beach Boys are fluff. Because I think when people think of the sounds of the 60s, you immediately go to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, or some people might go to the Who, some people might, the Motown sound, and all that is incredible. But I don't think the Beach Boys ever get the recognition they truly deserve, because they went through a thing where they started experimenting with different sounds and harmonies, and that's when we started getting stuff like Good Vibrations and Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows. And, honestly, they're absolutely a phenomenal entity. And whether, they're a group that you only listen to when you're, having a summer party and you throw some Beach Boys in, or if you're like me and, they're timeless, year round, it doesn't matter. Of course, we know that the original lineup were the Wilson brothers. Brian Wilson, Carl Wilson, Dennis Wilson. And then from there they started adding people like Mike Love, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, a couple of other ones in there as well. I remember watching a documentary about them, and they were just, their father really wanted them to do more serious stuff, but they were happy doing the beach sound to start things off. They were just looking for good times, probably wanting to get laid, make some money. But their father always tried to push them to, you shouldn't be making crap like this. And eventually, Brian, who really had a lot to do with their artistic side, started bringing them around. But unfortunately, they didn't get to the point where they just continued that. Because then eventually in the 70s, they had stuff like Do It Again and rock and roll music. And, again, they kind of got reduced to being this fun party type group. I was lucky enough to see the Beach Boys. I'm not that old. I did not see them when they were having the big hits in the 60s. I did get a chance to see them in the late 80s when they did the Cocktail soundtrack. And Kokomo was back at #1. And I went to go see them. They were a lot older. They had a lot of big fans. They sold out their show. And what I love about certain concerts is when you see all age groups. When you see kids, you see their parents, you see their grandparents. And the Beach Boys had one of those things. Now, there were a couple of funny people in the crowd that were, making references to the fact that they're not really boys anymore, and they were a little late, so people were yelling, wheel them out, and stuff like that, which to me is just horrible. If you're there to see them, you're there to see them. But anyhow, when they did come out, they did a kick-ass show. They just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And they did a great, there's a great DVD out there of the show, and it's a phenomenal show. And even though they've lost a couple members along the way, through death or quitting, I think 2 Wilson brothers are both gone now. Carl and Dennis both passed on. But they have given us some phenomenal music, and this DVD is a great one. And if you're a fan of the Beach Boys, you should check it out. It's the 50th anniversary concert. And they actually wrote a song called That's Why God Made the Radio, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. It's become one of my favorite beach songs because it just sounds like their old harmonies, and you can tell these guys are still sounding incredible 50 years later. And I think one of the reasons why the Beach Boys are timeless is because I know for me growing up, and I saw other generations, there's almost a time when kids and teenagers almost go through a Beach Boys phase. Now, I'm not saying every one of you. Some of you, are listening to the goth stuff or heavy metal. But I knew a lot of people growing up of different generations who went through, I really like the Beach Boys, because I don't think there's anything that's really not to like, Sure, some people might not be up on their, surfing safaris or the surfing USA, but, some of their other stuff, like, I consider I Get Around and Fun just to be absolutely amazing pieces of work. Even something like Little Surfer Girl. I can't relate to anything in that, but it is such a sweet song. I'd probably more go to something called Don't Worry Baby, which is just phenomenal. If you know the Beach Boys and this makes you just have a craving to go listen to them, I hope I inspired that. If you don't know the Beach Boys, why don't you give it a try, especially on a beautiful day, nice breeze going by. Definitely check it out. Now, I do play majority of the Beach Boys during the summer, but I actually like them all year round because they have some songs that are, a song like Wouldn't It Be Nice or, Good Vibrations doesn't necessarily have to be played during the summer. And they've got a lot of songs that aren't, necessarily about summer, Of course they do, have a lot. And I think that's why kids go through that phase because, they sang about, cruising around and surfing or hanging out at the drive-in with your best girl. And everybody goes through that dating phase and can relate to, driving in your first car and stuff like that. And one of the reasons I like playing them in the winter is because, as much as you could play, as I said, you could play, in my room or something like that in the winter. But, sometimes it's fun to just have your MP3 on shuffle and you're trudging through knee-deep snow and the irony of, Surfing USA comes on. And it makes me smile because it just reminds me, one, I probably don't like snow as much as I did when I was younger, or two, it's only a few months. And we'll be back to sunshine and happiness. But I also like the snow, so sometimes a Good Vibrations when the sun is shining and the snow is really bright. It's kind of nice to hear. And of course they have a Christmas tune. They've got a couple, but Little Saint Nick is an absolute classic. And definitely it wouldn't be Christmas without that being in my Christmas rotation. I think the Beach Boys are sweet sounding music. It's just feel-good music. It's like drinking a glass of orange juice. But I don't think they get the love they deserve as far as artistry. And I am happy to say that I have at least read a couple of articles and saw some documentaries where they say that, they have actually created some of the greatest music ever, and not just for, pure pop. Pet Sounds is considered to be one of the best albums of all time. And if you get a chance to just listen to that fully through, it's a mind-blowing experience. Brian Wilson also released an album called The Smile Sessions, which basically is just, a collection of songs that were kind of induced by the music of the past from Pet Sounds and stuff like that may have not have been used, and he kind of replayed with them. It's hard to explain, but another wonderful album that came in, 2011, and a wonderful thing to check out. As I said, if me talking about this inspired you to go check out some Beach Boys, absolutely great. And that makes me feel good. And if you're new to the Beach Boys, and that's cool too, check it out and see what you think. I'm sure if you listen to a couple of tracks, you will find one or two that you will love, or if you're like me, just anything they release just eventually grows on you and just makes me smile. And I think I am going to go now and put on some Beach Boys and just sit back, relax, and enjoy my summer day. And I have had a wonderful, it's been kind of a roller coaster of emotions today. And I like that I can do a show, I can do, a show that's crazy and funny and thing, and then I can mellow it down a bit and get a little heartfelt and maybe, go to places that aren't always easy to go to. But this one, Emily, is ending on a high, and I'm going to keep that high up with some great Beach Boys music. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you here next week when I drop another episode. So until then, I will talk to you very, very soon.